Okay, yep, all righty. All right, everybody. Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to the Best of Missouri Hands workshop, Natural Dye Basics with Annie Webster. I'm Allison Norfleet-Bringer, and helping out today is Kim Carr and Wanda Tyner. In our workshop today, we would like everyone to kind of please stay muted, although, there's ways to let us know. If you have any questions or issues, please use the chat feature. You'll find the chat button at the bottom of your taskbar on your screen, and make sure to have some paper and pen handy, ready to take some notes. And near the end of the workshop, we'll open up the floor for a little questions and answers. Our speaker for our online workshop today is Best of Missouri Hands Vice President, Annie Webster. Annie, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Annie, and I am in the Kansas City region of Missouri, and I am a fiber artist. I do a lot of crochet and embroidery, and over the past few years, I've become really drawn to the colors that we can get from nature. I've dyed a lot of yarns with natural plants and natural extracts, and I've done some natural printing. And I love the colors that we can get from plants, and they all kind of go together in their own little color wheel, and they're really beautiful. So today I'm going to take you through the basics of dyeing wool yarn with marigolds. Natural dyeing is a big topic, and we're going to just help you learn enough to make you dangerous. It's something that a lot of people have a lot of opinions about too, and people can get really strong in their convictions about what will dye, what won't dye, what kind of pots you should use, what kind of chemicals you should use with your dyes. And I am not the be all end all on this by any stretch of the imagination. So I encourage you to seek out other dyers to get additional information and to kind of fill in some of the gaps that I know I'm going to leave because we just have this small amount of time to go through this. So let me share my screen and find my presentation here. And your little faces are in the way. Here we go. All right. So we are dyeing with marigolds. And natural dyeing is a process. It takes a lot of time and requires some patience. So our first step is going to be cleaning the yarn, and that's called scouring. This just prepares it to accept the chemicals, and it prepares it to accept the dye. Our next step is mordanting, which is adding chemicals to the yarn to make it more receptive to color. And then we actually get to do the dyeing of the yarn, which is creating a dye bath from your dye stuffs, whether they be plants or whether they be extracts, and then adding the yarn to that dye bath to get color into the yarn. And then we rinse the yarn to remove any excess dye, any little bits of plant matter that might have attached to the yarn in the process. Then you dry it, and then you can use it to make beautiful things. Most of this process is waiting around for stuff to happen. It's waiting for things to heat up. It's waiting for things to cool down. When we're working with wool, especially, we don't want it to get too hot too fast, too cold too fast, and we don't want to agitate it while it's hot. That can result in felting, which is when your fibers join together and you create a fabric just from the strings joining together. And felting can be great when you're creating like a bag or a bowl or something, but when you have it happen unintentionally, it's not good. You don't want to end up with a big mass of fiber when you're wanting to knit or crochet a project afterwards. So slow heating, slow cooling, that's the key to keeping the yarn intact. I see a little hand from Kim. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. when you're talking about the yarn and stuff, so are you talking about raw yarn? I mean, is this something you're buying at the store, like
This
that
is,
you go to
yeah.
Michael's and buy, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm using this for the demo today. This is just
Okay.
a ball that I got at Michael's. Exactly. You can dye with the yarn right off of the sheep. I mean, you'll want to do a little prep with that first to get all the little vegetative matter, they call that VM, out of the wool. So it's not dirty. You want to clean it a little bit, but you can dye before the yarn is spun. You can dye it after it's spun. You could even, you know, crochet a nice scarf and then dye it after that. It doesn't matter really when in the process that you do it. But mostly I've done it just with yarn that I've purchased either at the store or online.
Is there, do you have to, like you said, you add a chemical to make the yarn receptive to accepting the dyes? Do you have to do that with raw yarn?
Yes.
That's like been sheared and spun. You still have to do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. We call this natural dyeing, but there are chemicals involved, and not everything that is natural is safe. Like poison ivy is natural, but it's bad. Boo. So you're going to want to wear a mask when you're dealing with particles. Your COVID mask is fine for that. These are bigger particles than COVID, so you should be protected with that. And wear gloves when you're handling chemicals. Be mindful of your own allergies. And I think the most important thing is that the pots and measuring cups and spoons that you'll be using throughout your dye practice are only for dyeing now. Don't use them to cook in. In my house, I just put a big black X with a Sharpie on anything that I use for dyeing, and we know that that means it's not for food anymore. In the demo that I'm going to use to do today, everything is food safe that I'm using, so it's not as critical, but it's good practice. Like I said, we're going to use wool today, but there are lots of fibers available for you to use. Protein fibers are things like wool, they're animal hair, sheep, alpaca, yak. Yak is really very soft and wonderful. If you have an opportunity, get your hands on some of that. It's the easiest to prepare for natural dyeing, so that's what we're going to use today. And I think it's a good starting place. Cellulose fibers can also be naturally dyed. Those are the plant-based fibers like cotton and bamboo. They require a couple extra steps to get ready to get the color to attach. So we're not going to do that today, but the information for that is easily found online, and I can hook you up with that info if you'd like it. Other fibers are synthetic fibers, and that's mostly what you will find at the craft store. It's those acrylic and polyester fibers like the Red Heart yarn. Those don't take up color well, and if they do take it up, they don't hold on to it. It's more of a stain on it. So that's not a good choice for dyeing. And then there are blends of all those fibers, and those you can experiment with. If you have something that's like an 80-20 wool acrylic blend, you might get that wool to take up the color that you're dyeing with, and the acrylic stays whatever color it is. And that can be really cool, or it can look really bad. So experiment with small portions of that before you commit to doing, you know, a whole ball. So this is the yarn that I'm using for this demo. It's Patton's Classic Worsted Wool. And I did get it at Michael's. I've also purchased this at Joann too. They probably have it at Hobby Lobby, but that's not the closest store to me, so I don't get there as often. And it is 100% wool, so you'll want to look for that. You can also find wool yarn at yarn.com. You can search by fiber type there. You will get blends in your search results because it's just searching for that tag wool. So you'll need to kind of sort those out yourself to make sure you're getting 100% wool. Maiwa is a natural dye website, and they have lots of dyeable items on their site that will be good for dyeing. And Dharma Trading Company is where I usually buy from because you can get it in bulk, and they have all sorts of weights of yarn. They have fabric. They have, if you're into tie-dye, they have every kind of cotton white t-shirt you can imagine to tie-dye on. So Dharma is, I think, a great resource. Okay, so we got our,
Annie,
yes.
Annie, we
Yes.
have another question from Allison. She asked, can you use these dyes to paint with on fibers like watercolor on flat fabric?
You can. I think they need a little thickening so you're not just, because it's basically water in the form that I'm using it. So when you create your dye, you're going to need to thicken it up a little bit if you're going to want to paint with it. I've used guar gum for that in the past as a thickener. Jane Dunewald does some really good tutorials on painting with dyes, some of them natural and some of them not natural, like the acid dyes that you would use to dye yarn really beautiful colors that you can't get from nature. Jane, Dunnewold, Dunnewold is how she spells her name. And there's also another dyer, I'll have her information at the end. The Dogwood dyer also does some tutorials on painting and printing with dyes, and she's another good resource. So our yarn is in this ball when we buy it, and this is great if you're going to start a knitting or crochet project. You'll pull it out from the end and you have it all kind of in this contained unit. But this isn't good for dyeing with because we need water and dye to get into all of these fibers. And if they're all spun up like this in the middle, it's hard for the liquid to reach there. So we need to take it out of this ball and get it into more of a loop shape, a hank. There's a couple of ways you can do that. I use a Nitty Noddy, which is this guy right here. They sell beautiful wooden ones of these in stores that look like they would be a dream to work with, but mine is just made out of PVC pipe. I found the instructions to do this online. It's just a couple of cuts of PVC and little caps so it doesn't catch the yarn there. And basically you just hold your yarn and wrap around till you get a big loop like you see here. You can also do this with a couple of chairs. So you have your chair backs and you spread them apart. So you have a good distance there. And then you just take the yarn and wrap around. You can run around the chairs. It's kind of fun. So you're just creating a big loop. And then you need to tie that loop so the yarn isn't getting tangled when it's in your dye pot. So this is how I do that. I've got my loop here and I'm just kind of separating out the strand into 3 or 4 chunks. And then I take a piece of scrap yarn and I'm just weaving it over and under. This is just a piece of acrylic yarn that is a light color. I don't want to use something that's going to bleed onto my yarn to tie off because I'll get a little stripe in there and that's not what I want. So I'm just weaving it in there, keeping it loose, and then I'm going to tie a knot in it. And this will secure the yarn when it's in the dye pot and when it's moving from pot to pot. So hopefully the yarn doesn't get too tangled while we're in this process. And I'm going to tie this yarn off a couple more times. Just to keep it loose. If you bunch it up too much, that's going to be difficult for the dye to get in there, and you will end up with, instead of a stripe from yarn that bleeds, you'll end up with a white stripe from dye that didn't get into the yarn. Next step is to weigh your fiber. The weight of your fiber is probably the most important number that you're going to need in this process. Everything is based off the weight of your fiber. So you're going to want to keep track of this number. It's abbreviated WOF. So you'll see things like 50% WOF, and that just means 50% of the weight of your fiber. Gram scale is really helpful here. If you have it, some of the measurements that we'll be doing are pretty small, and it's just more accurate if you have the grams, but if you don't, that's okay. And if you don't have a scale that's dedicated to your dye practice, just cover your scale with a piece of plastic wrap to keep from contaminating it. You're not going to contaminate it by weighing your yarn, obviously, but as you move into chemicals and plants, then you'll want to protect it. So when I bought this yarn, it says that it is 100 grams. And when I weighed it, it is 99 grams. But 100 grams is a lot easier to do math off of than 99. So we're calling this 100 grams of yarn. 100 grams is our number for this demo. Okay, so it's time to clean the yarn. This is called scouring. This is just removing any of the leftover dirt and oil from the spinning process, or when someone's walking through the craft store and they've just put lotion on their hands and then they're touching all the yarn. That's going to keep the dye from being able to really get into that fiber. So we want to start with a clean fiber. We're going to take a stock pot. In the next slide, you'll see I use an enameled canning pot for this, and you can pick them up fairly cheap at Goodwill sometimes. And I have several of them in various sizes. And we're just going to use Blue Dawn dish soap to wash our yarn. You probably have some sitting by your sink right now. It's pretty simple process. So you're going to fill up your pot with water, so that the yarn can move around freely. You'll want to use a fair amount of water. You just want to give the yarn the best chance it can have to accept whatever you're putting into it, whether it's the soap, whether it's chemicals, whether it's dye. So a lot of water is the way to go. So then you'll add your soap, and then you'll add your wetted yarn to this pot. What that means is that the yarn that you're adding to the pot is already wet. And I do this by filling up my sink and throwing my yarn in there while I'm gathering my supplies. If the yarn is wet, it's more, I'm doing my little dance moves. It's more free to accept what's coming to it. You don't have to go through the process of it getting wet and then doing the accepting of the soap or the dye. So you add your wetted yarn, then you bring the mixture up to 140 degrees and you maintain that heat for an hour. Then you remove it from the heat and let it cool down. And then you rinse the yarn in cool water. I know that this process takes a while, so I usually remove my pot from the heat and just let it sit overnight even. But you want it to be cool enough that you can reach your hand in there comfortably and pull out the yarn. Show you my setup here. I've got my canning pot, and you can see I've used it a lot. It's stained on the bottom. I've got my yarn that has been wetted. I've got my scale and my cup to measure, and my Dawn dish soap. I like to have a little bit of water in my measuring cup when I start. It's easier to dissolve the soap, and it's easier to get all of the soap out and into the pot. If you have a big enough scale, you could put your pot onto the scale and do it that way, but it's hard to read the numbers on my scale with that big pot sitting there, so I do it separately. So I've measured out a gram because it's 1% weighted fiber. with our 100 grams of yarn. So that's 1 gram of soap. And I'm just dissolving it a little bit. I don't want a ton of suds in my stock pot just because that can get messy. And I like keeping the mess to a minimum if I can. So the soap is in the pot and I'm just going to add my wetted yarn in there. And I didn't get quite as much water in my pot as I like. So I'm just taking whatever water I have left in pitchers and throwing it in the pot too, just so that yarn can swim around pretty freely. And when I move the yarn around in the pot, it's more of a poking motion. It's not so much of a stirring. I don't want to agitate it. Where it's not hot right now, it's not as important, but when it gets hot, that agitation can lead to felting, and we want to avoid that. So this will go on the stove, and I'll raise it to temperature 140, maintain that heat for an hour, take it off of the heat, let it cool, and then I will rinse my yarn of the soap. And I just do that in the sink. I'll have some more rinsing in the end here, but that's not rocket science. You rinse off the yarn. So after it's cleaned, we add our mordant to the yarn. And this is the process that makes the color stick to the yarn. For protein fibers, I use alum, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the process is that you fill your stock pot with enough water so the yarn can move around freely. And then we're going to use alum at 15% of the weight of fiber. So for our example, it's 15 grams of alum. And we dissolve this in warm water and then add it to the pot and stir it around a little bit to make sure that it is well incorporated. Then we add our wetted yarn, which is probably still wet from the scouring process if you're doing all these steps in order. But if your yarn dries out between one of these steps, that's fine. Just wet it down a little bit and stick it in the pot. So this time we're bringing it up to 195, just below a boil, and maintaining that for an hour. Then we'll remove it from the heat, let it cool, and rinse it again. So I've got all of my supplies here for mordanting: the pot, the yarn, the scale, the cup. Here's my alum. This is just from the grocery store. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then I have my tea kettle with some warm water to dissolve that alum in. I'm going to start with some water in my cup. That, since this is food safe grocery store alum, again, not as big a deal, but it gives somewhere for the particles to land, so they're not just floating around in the air. They can land in that water. So there's less chance for them to float around and then become inhaled, even though I would be wearing a mask. Still, reducing chances is good. So 15 grams of alum, it's about half of this container. I think that's a 30-gram container. And then I'm just going to stir it and dissolve the alum as best as possible. There will still be a few little grains in there, you can see. Adding a little bit more water. It's kind of like watching paint dry, dissolving alum. And it's pretty good.
Annie,
Yes.
Annie,
Mhm.
so alum, I don't know what that is. So but you're saying you can buy it at the grocery store?
Yeah.
And so it just helps the yarn absorb the dyes more?
Exactly. Yeah. I think you use it to keep pickles crisp is one of the uses of
Oh.
alum.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's in the pot. You add the yarn, poke it around a little bit. If you need to, kind of turn your yarn to make sure it's all underwater, you can pick it up and drop it back in. That's not a big deal. Just not stirring like you would stir a soup or something like that. So again, I will take this to the stove, heat it to 195 this time. This one I think is the one that you can get closest to boiling accidentally, but try to avoid that. Let it sit at 195 for an hour, let it cool, and rinse it off. So
Annie?
alum, yes.
Adam has a question. Adam, I'm going to have you unmute yourself and ask Annie that question because I don't know if I can pronounce that one word.
Okay. What mordant would you use for cellulose fibers?
For cellulose fibers, you can use the alum mordant, but you also need to use it's another mordant before the alum. That is the one that I use is oak gall. And I order that. I don't try and hunt that down off of oak leaves myself, but they're like these little knobs on the back of oak leaves.
I'm very familiar.
Okay, good. So yeah, if you can hunt them down if you want to yourself. I've seen people do that, but I don't have an oak tree in my yard, so I order that. And in the notes at the end, there's a website that from Maiwa that has really detailed instructions on the whole mordanting process and has that for cellulose fibers too. And I think they're a good resource. But basically you do the oak and gall mordant first and rinse, and then you do the alum mordant, and then you move on to your dyeing. It's just another step there for the cellulose fibers.
Thank you.
Sure. So when I'm dyeing at home, I use potassium aluminum sulfate. It's a kind of alum, and I can buy it in bulk online, so it's cost effective. And this is weird. It has fewer impurities than the grocery store alum, but it's not safe to eat. That's kind of counterintuitive. You would think you would want to eat the most pure, but the impurities in grocery store alum are not bad. They're things like iron. Iron's a good thing for most people. So I get more consistent results because I know exactly what is in that alum. Aluminum acetate is an alum that is used for cellulose fibers. People tend to get better results using that kind of alum. And then there's grocery store alum, which is what I'm using today. And it's what I recommend if you're just getting started. It can contain things like iron, which can darken the color that you're getting in your dye. And that's sometimes something that we use to our advantage. It's called saddening the color, which I think is just a lovely way of describing getting a dark color. But it takes like the yellow yarn that we'll get from our marigold dye and turns it into more of an olive green when you add iron. But the small amount of iron in grocery store alum isn't going to give that big of an impact to our yarn. It just might be inconsistent. Like you might get a slightly darker color of yellow from one batch to the next using the grocery store alum. But if you're just getting started and you want to see if you like doing this, I would say don't invest a lot of money and end up with this tub of alum, the potassium alum sulfate at home that you don't know what to do with, and get the little $1.25 thing of best choice alum from the grocery store. I've dyed lots of yarn that way, and I think it's perfectly fine if you're just getting started. So finally, we are going to get to some color here. I'm using marigolds today, and you don't need a ton of them to get decent color. We didn't plant very many this year, but I still get a nice bright yellow yarn. And these are really sad marigolds. These are after a frost even. I think I took this picture. But I deadhead them throughout the season. That's just, you know, pulling them off of the plant right about here. Right about here. When they're fresher, they give you this really satisfying pop sound when you pull them off. I just love it. And I take my flowers and I put them in a Ziploc bag and I store them in the freezer. That works best for me. We have a deep freeze and I can fill it up with flowers. So that works best for me. Other people will pluck their flowers and dry them, whether they just do it by laying them out or by putting them in a dehydrator, and then they can store them on the shelf, like in a mason jar or something like that. To me, the space burden of putting them in the freezer is not as much as the space burden of having them sit out somewhere would be. So I go with freezing, and you don't need to thaw them before you use them, and they can stay for quite a while in the freezer. I am also guilty of plucking them, thinking I'm going to use them right away and just putting them in the fridge and then forgetting about them and they get moldy. So I would recommend putting them in the freezer, even if you think you're going to use them right away, because you don't want to use moldy flowers. That's not good for you to breathe in when you're working. So we're going to extract the dye from the flowers. And for this demo, we're going to use our marigolds at 50% weight of fiber. So we're going to use 50 grams of marigolds. Then we're going to put them in a pot, add water to cover, and bring it to a simmer. The temperature is not quite as critical here because we don't have yarn in the pot and we don't have to worry about something felting. We're just worrying about extracting the color from the plants. So we're going to simmer these for an hour and add more water if we need to, because we don't want the pot to dry out. Then we'll cool it down and drain the mixture. And we're keeping the liquid here and getting rid of the solids, which is an important thing to keep in mind, because usually when we're doing a project, we keep the solid stuff and get rid of the liquid. But you want to keep the liquid. That's where all the dye is. So I'm using a little bit smaller pot here. If you just have one pot that you're dedicating to dyeing, that's totally fine. But I have a few that I've snagged. This was something that my parents made candles in the 70s when they were cool. So I stole this from them so I can be cool now. But it is white, so you can see what's going on, which is nice.
Hey, Annie, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Are you just using the marigold petals, or are you actually using like the seeds and like that whole end part?
That whole end part. Yeah, I can't
Okay.
remember what that piece is that the petals are held together with, but I use that too. I think, especially with marigolds, those petals are so little and finicky that I kind of think it's a waste to pick out the petals and get rid of that part. It's easier just to use the whole thing. And if a couple of leaves get in there too, that's okay. I wouldn't put a ton of leaves in there, but I'm not maybe the neatest person when it comes to gathering the flowers. It's usually hot and I just want to get them gathered and back inside into the air conditioning. So I zeroed out my scale and I'm putting my marigolds in, and you can see some of them are kind of dried out and look almost black from their dried outness. And some of them look a little more alive, but they all have color in them. And it turns out that it was almost that whole bag of marigolds that I needed for this. And then I drop a few on the floor and it's all good fun. And usually I would just fill this up with tap water and put it on the stove. But I kind of wanted to show you how quickly they start to give off color. So I'm using some warm water from my tea kettle here and pouring it over them. And just that small amount of time in the hot water, and you can see there's already some yellow in the water. The color comes off of them really fast. And after spending so much time doing steps that have no color involved in them at all, this is exciting to see, I think. So this will go up to the stove, simmer for an hour, adding more water as needed, and then I'll cool it down and I will drain it, which is what I'm going to do right here. These marigolds are pretty spent. You can, instead of discarding these after you've drained them, you could try and boil them again and get more color out of them. Our dye bath you see here is pretty dark already. So if you did boil these again, you could make a second dye bath that would be a little bit lighter in color maybe. You could add it back to this one, but I don't think we need any more color in this one. This one will be fine. And you'll see when we rinse, there's quite a bit of runoff color on this. So I think this amount of marigold is fine for our project. And I'm just kind of running some water over them to make sure I get any color that's left on the plants into my dye bath.
Is there anything special about the marigolds, or will any flowers or plant material with color work?
Marigolds are particularly good for this. It's kind of a mixed bag. A lot of the yellow plants do really well. Coreopsis are one of my favorites to work with just because I think they're really pretty flowers in general, but they give a really nice clear yellow color. A lot of plants that you think are beautiful do not give you something that looks beautiful when you dye, like a bright pink zinnia maybe. I've tried more printing and dyeing with that, and it's kind of this gross army green color that I get out of it. So it's kind of hit and miss. There's a lot of places online where you can see people who've tried things. People have got good results, haven't got good results. And a lot of food type items aren't great for dyeing. That produces more of a stain than a dye, which is sad. Like when you're cutting up beets and you have this beautiful red color and then you try and dye with it and it's this gross yellow and it's not color fast. It doesn't attach to the yarn or the fabric very well. An exception to that are onion skins. They dye really well, both the yellow onion skins and the red onion skins. And I have a couple of like mesh produce bags that I keep in my pantry, and I just save all my onion skins and dye with them when I have collected enough of them. So to dye, we're going to fill our pot up with enough water so the yarn can move around freely. And then we're going to add our extracted dye liquid. Then we'll add the yarn. And then we will slowly bring it up to 160 degrees, maintain that heat for an hour, remove it from the heat, let it cool, and then rinse the yarn in cool water, which is what is going to happen here. I've got my pot, I've got my dye liquid. It goes into the pot. And I add my yarn. And you can see
Hey,
the
Annie?
yarn. Uh-huh.
Um, you're measuring all these things for like exact science and stuff.
Mhm.
But like you rinsed the marigolds with a little more water and everything like that. So I'm assuming like you can create different hues of this color, right? A lighter and a darker. How do you do that? Like in the amount of water you add, or in the time that you have it on the heat, or how do you create different hues?
The amount of water that you're using in this process is kind of irrelevant. I think this is a really hard concept it was a hard concept for me to understand, but there's like a finite amount of dye in those marigolds. And when you put it in the dye bath, there's a finite number of places for that dye to go in the yarn. So it is going to fill up the yarn with the dye, regardless of if you put the dye bath and the yarn in a cup of water or if you put it in a swimming pool of water. They're going to find each other. So if you're going to dilute it, it is more about the amount of plant matter that you're using from the beginning. You would want to use like a 10% weight of fiber for your marigolds, or a 20% weight of fiber for your marigolds to get those different shades of yellow. Does that make any sense?
Yes, ma'am. That
Okay.
makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Sure,
Thank
no problem. So we've got our bath here. It's ready to go up to the stove, 195 for an hour, and then it comes down. But sometimes stuff happens like this. It wasn't even close to 165 or 160 when I went outside. Just for a second, don't panic. And there was a bunny, and I looked at the bunny for a while, and I came back in and it was boiling like mad. So don't panic when this happens. I wish I could say I did this on purpose as an example, but no, it was just me not paying attention to what was going on. So take it off the heat as soon as you can, and not the lazy kind of take it off the heat where you just turn off the burner, but the real kind where you actually remove it from the heat. Don't stir it, because this is where it is most likely to felt, is when it's this hot and it gets agitated. There's agitation happening in there from the boiling. And I do get a little bit of felting in this yarn. You'll see at the end, but not enough to like create a fabric from it, just so that the strands stick together a little bit. Move it off the heat, let it come back down to 160 where it's supposed to be. And then you can put it back on the burner at a very low heat and let it continue its process. This yarn is not wasted. It's still fine. I wouldn't like make a washcloth for a delicate baby's face with it because it's a little rough. But since I do mostly wall hangings, this yarn is still going to be fine for me. Your mileage may vary with something like this, but maybe don't go outside and find a bunny while you're working on your yarn. That is my advice to you. Pay attention to what's going on your stove. So once your yarn is finished in its hour bath and then cooled down, we're going to rinse it. And you'll probably have some color come off in the rinsing process, which is totally normal. Even if you buy commercial yarns, you'll sometimes have some color run off when you wash your project. I use my bathroom sink for this because the sink is white and I can see what's going on. But if you have a white bowl or a white dish pan, that would work too. You just kind of want to be able to see that color run off. And then you're going to rinse until the runoff is really fading. And then you'll add a little bit of that blue Dawn dish soap or a wool soap. I like to use Eucalyptus because it smells nice. But then you use that for a final wash and rinse, and then you can hang it to dry. So here I am one-handed pouring this pot into my bathroom sink. And you can see there's a lot of yellow.
That's pretty.
Yeah. There are, instead of dumping that out, you can save that water that was left over. That's called an exhaust bath. And you can use it to try and dye another hank of yarn that you've already prepared. The color will probably be lighter. That's another way of getting different shades of yarn. And it's a way of not wasting your dyes, especially if you've bought like an expensive extract or something. You can use it over and over and over again until you completely exhaust that dye bath and you aren't getting much color on your yarn. But in this case, I just dumped it down the sink. So I'm just rinsing it off. That video is really loud. Goodness.
Annie, I have a kind of strange question. This will not do any, the dye won't do anything to some of the places, because I'm thinking like white sinks. I know at my studio I have one that, you know, I can get stained, but I'm thinking like, I'm like, oh my gosh, and you're trying to scrub this stuff back out, it has any type of residue that you can or can't get off. That's what's
I haven't had a problem with that. And I've rinsed a lot of yarn in this sink, and I've rinsed some pretty dark colors in it. Yeah, sometimes it takes a little elbow grease, but bleach is your friend a lot of times after you've finished. And but like the dye pot I was using, you can see that it is stained. And I've bleached and scrubbed that, and it's just not coming off. But for the white sink, I get that maybe that porcelain protects it a little bit. But I haven't had a problem with staining on it. It just scrub, scrub, scrub. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser and bleach. So I'm filling up the sink here to let it soak for a little bit, let some of that extra color wick out. And after I did that for about 15 minutes, you can see there's still quite a bit of color there. And then, so I did that a couple more times, and then I added a little soap, and the color is much lighter now. So I rinsed it a couple times to get the soap out. And now you can see when I'm squeezing it, there's just not much color left in that yarn at all. We've gotten most of the excess out. So I take mine and kind of drape it over a hanger to let it dry. I didn't do it here, but I do have a salad spinner that I use for yarn. That can help get some of the excess water out of it. You don't want it just sopping wet when you hang it to dry, because that weight can pull on the fiber and kind of stretch out the fibers that are up here. But you can also take the hank of yarn and wrap it in a towel before you hang it and squeeze it a little bit gently. And that gets a lot of the water out too. So once this dries, you've got this beautiful bright yellow yarn that you can use to make whatever it is you would like to make. If you've worked with yarn before and you've bought yarn in this hank, you know not to use it directly from this hank, or you will end up with a big tangled mess. So I roll my yarn into a ball when I'm done with it to store it. And I usually stick mine on the back of a chair. This is not the best chair for that because it's got these two little hooks here down at the bottom and the yarn gets tangled in there, but it's what I had available at the time. So I'm cutting all the ties and then I'm going to wind it into a ball. And if you don't know how to do that, I'm going to show you real quick. I start with just wrapping it around my fingers a few times. 10 is kind of the number in my head, but that is not a magic number by any stretch of the imagination. I keep my fingers apart because I want it to be loose. I'm not trying to make a basketball that'll bounce. I want this to be loose so there's not stress on the fiber. So after that, I fold it in half and then I do the same thing again, but I keep wrapping it around my fingers so it's loose, not just around the yarn. And I'm just rotating it. And I'm kind of creating a disc at this point of the yarn. And I'm getting stuck on the chair like I said I would.
Hey, Annie,
Uh-huh.
when you create a piece with the yarns that you have dyed,
Mhm.
do you like make note of that on something so that people know that, you know, this piece has yarn, you know, that has marigold, you know, that was dyed with marigolds or other natural, you know, do you have something that goes with that piece that states this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's usually like I usually do pieces for shows and galleries. So that's usually on the artist statement or the statement about each piece that it was naturally dyed with marigold and madder and indigo or whatever it was. So there is a note of that.
Okay.
Because I think it's cool to know what
Mhm.
is in the piece, not just, oh, that's yellow yarn, yay. Yeah, I do.
Good.
Oops.
I do have a odd question too, when you're just saying, they're going to galleries and things like that.
Mhm.
Do you put any sort of information about, you know, making sure not to put it at a certain places? Because I noticed that some places will put it in a light area. And that's why I don't know about the light safety, like if the sun, then, you know,
Right.
after a certain amount of time, and then it fades because you know, once the customer decides to put it in their favorite spot,
Mhm.
you know, and then it starts
Right,
fading.
yeah.
How do you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you put a statement on there that says that natural dyes are sensitive to light, but so is all artwork. I mean, you don't want to hang a painting in bright light either. It's going to fade if you do that too. So yeah, not to hang it in bright light. Though having said that, I was in a show at the Anita Gorman Nature Sanctuary here in Kansas City, and they had all of our artwork hanging in a hallway, and there were windows directly across from all of our artwork. And I think that show was there for a month, I think, maybe 6 weeks, and I didn't notice any change to my piece from when I dropped it off to when I picked it up. I do test for light fastness when I'm dyeing, and basically I take some of the yarn and I cover up half of it with a piece of cardboard, and then I hang it in the window. We have a slider that faces south in our house, and I put a little hook up there so I can hang my little light fast test kit. So then in, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, I take that down and I can see what's faded and what hasn't faded. And I think that's really interesting. I also think that process in general is interesting, and it's interesting in the art that this is a piece that can change throughout the life of the piece. That doesn't speak to everyone, and I get that. And it wouldn't speak to me if every color completely washed out to white. I don't think I'd be as excited about that. But yeah, I like that these are natural things and that there is some change in them. And I think that's important to explain to people. And I think it's important to use dyes that have a track record of being light fast and color fast. That's one of the things that you'll find like in Facebook groups, that people will go all crazy about, oh no, you dyed that with red cabbage. That is totally not a thing you can use. And but you're looking at your beautiful thing that you just dyed and you're like, why is that not good? But it's because it's not color fast and it's not light fast. And that is where natural dyes get a bad rap, is using bad methods like not mordanting, or using plants that simply don't really work for this process. There's that, like, I can't remember what the little video outfit's called, but you'll see the videos on Facebook where they like have a bowl of blueberries and a white t-shirt, and they put the t-shirt in the bowl of blueberries, and you've got this beautiful shirt that looks like it has been indigo dyed. And it probably has been indigo dyed, because there's no way those blueberries, by just sticking a shirt in there, are going to produce that result. It just isn't going to happen. But that's another way that it gets a bad rap, because people are expecting that. So do your research, and I don't know, be a little cautious of what you see online of, you know, laying a carrot on a t-shirt and all of a sudden you have an orange t-shirt, because that just doesn't happen. I did find this little section in my yarn that you can see where the felting occurred. You can see these strands are sticking to each other. They're not permanently sticking to each other. I can pull them apart, but that yarn isn't as soft as it was when I started. And this is not super soft yarn to start with. It's pure wool. So it's a, you know, it's got a little bit of that itchy, scratchy feel to it. But you can see that is what happens when you let your yarn boil. So try not to do that. Bad dyer Annie. Okay, so I have a few, come on there, just a few little resources that I wanted to share, because there's a lot of places to get information about natural dye, but I think these are some of the best. And I am not clever enough to get paid by any of these people to say they're good. So this is just what I think. Maiwa, again, for supplies and for courses, they have a naturaldyes.ca site. And that is a great place to go for instructions and tutorials. They have a PDF on that site that will take you through scouring for all different kinds of fabrics, mordanting for all kinds of fabrics, dyeing with all kinds of extracts and plants, and it's a great resource. Dharma Trading to get your supplies, to get your fabrics, your dyeables, they're great. I am in this natural dye education group on Facebook. There's lots of examples of dye projects and lots of people with a lot of knowledge of natural dyes. And for the most part, they are a nice group of people and are not going to be, why are you doing that? Because that happens a lot in Facebook groups. But yeah, and the lady who runs it, I think, is very knowledgeable and will try and guide you in the right direction if you have questions. Gina at Across Generations Fiber Arts. She often has classes at Fiber U in Lebanon. I believe Fiber U is in July of each year. They haven't announced their classes for this year. I think I saw that that happens in March, but I've taken a class on dyeing just with red dyes from her and dyeing with wood chips from her at Fiber U. She's a great resource. She has an Etsy shop that has supplies in it. She's in Oklahoma, I believe, and has a background like in natural resources or something along those lines. So she's really familiar with the plants of our area. So I think she's just a great resource. And the dogwood dyer is the one I mentioned earlier about painting with the dyes. She is in California, which, so she has these beautiful plants that I'm very jealous of because she has that kind of weather. She also has a subscription that is a year in natural dyeing, and each month she features a different plant and tutorials with those plants. And she's done indigo, fresh leaf indigo, coreopsis, cosmos. She did some pine needles in December, which was nice. So I think that one's a fun one too. I think the subscription is $10 a month. It's not overwhelming, and it's not something that you have to sign up for a year. If there's a month that looks particularly interesting to you, you can just get that month. So there you have it. Are there any other questions?
Well, Annie, I don't know, everybody else in here is more, this is something they can probably incorporate into the art they do and stuff like that. Me, I'm someone, I'm kind of blown away. I mean, I'm not a crafty or like, you know, I'm not able to do what you just did at all. And I was shocked by the amount of math that's involved in the science and stuff. I am truly intrigued by using the natural products because that is something I can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've dyed some things with cow poop, not intentionally, and I didn't use the science that you've used, but you know,
Yeah, you gotta weigh that poop, Kim.
Yeah. But I'm impressed, and I have a deeper and a greater appreciation for the fiber arts and the natural stuff now, because there's really a lot more to it than, you know. So I'm impressed. Thank you for doing this.
That makes me feel good. Thank you. And it's I mean, the dyeing has been fun, but it's really also opened up my gardening life in a way that I wasn't expecting, because I plant a lot of these now. And that has been really fun too. But it has also made winter just the worst, because there's nothing outside for me to be poking around at and picking at and seeing if it's blooming. So I've been going outside and looking at all of these dead things, and that is just, yeah, it's not as exciting as when things are in bloom in the summer and I'm figuring out how I can use them.
I just thought about what you were just saying. How do
Lori?
you start planning that part out now? Because that is curious. I love planting, as you know, slowly learning more. So is there, just certain things that you would start I can start making my notes now, maybe what type of plants or seedlings or things to start off with, because it sounds really, really cool. And it would be neat to be able to incorporate it.
Yeah.
To, like you say, to grow your own would be really great. Is there things that you might?
I recommend marigolds. They're really easy to grow, either from seed, or we often find them at Lowe's in the little sad discount plant bin. And so I am into that. I love coreopsis, like I said before. I've also done some printing with the plants, and those coreopsises print so beautifully. I just love them. They're such happy little flowers, and they're a native to Missouri, so I like that too. What else do I grow? I grow indigo too, and I use it fresh leaf. The indigo is a topic unto itself, but fresh leaf indigo is really easy to use. You basically just blend it and put your fabric in and you'll get a color. But if you're looking for information on indigo, the I guess king of indigo is John Marshall. He's amazing and knows everything you have ever wanted to know about indigo and more. And I get those plants. You can get seed for indigo and it grows pretty easily. I don't have a lot of luck with seeds sometimes. And I get indigo plants from a nursery in Ohio called Companion Plants. So that's a place to look for those. Other than that, I just plant stuff and see if it works. And if it doesn't, then I just have plants that I enjoy looking at too. So it's kind of, you can't lose with the planting.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Lori.
I missed the last resource on the first page.
Uh-huh.
Do you mind going back to that? I didn't write
Sure.
fast enough.
No problem. That was Dharma Trading, I think.
There
No, it was the Natural Dye Facebook group. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think if you search for it, it'll pop up, but they don't have their actual name in the group, in the URL, which is kind of a bummer.
Okay. I just totally missed that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for everything.
Oh, you're welcome.
Very interesting.
Yay. Thank you.
Annie, I want to tell
And-
you how interesting this is.
And I
since
think,
would never create anything in my life that requires sewing or knitting or whatever. But I want to share with you, and I'll try to find some pictures, but on my recent travels,
Mhm.
one of the places we went to was Peru, and specifically Cusco. And we went to a place that they actually had the llamas and the yacos and the other animals there. So we got to see the animals. And then this one lady demonstrated each different flower or thing that she used to dye and what colors it made. And
Mhm.
I'll just share this one little interesting story. So she said, I haven't showed you how I make red yet. Let me show you how I make red. And she gets this cactus out that's got a bunch of white things on it.
Uh-huh.
And she pulls a white thing off, smushes it on her hand. It was a parasite.
Uh-huh.
When she smushed the parasite, blood,
Mhm.
and that's what she used. And then she added, and I can't remember now, different
Wow.
things to that made different shades of red.
Mhm.
Just the creativity of
Right. Yeah.
making colors is pretty amazing.
Yeah, one of the things that you can use to get a red is the cochineal bug, and you can buy those already deceased, but that's a thing that Starbucks got in trouble with a few years ago because they were using that to color one of their strawberry drinks, which made it not vegetarian. So yeah, I mean, it's funny all the things that are used for coloring, but the cochineal it makes a really pretty reddish pink color. It's beautiful. But yeah, the blood, that's interesting. I should point out also that there are some toxic plants out there, and you should take a look and make sure that the plant you're using isn't toxic before you start, boiling it and getting all the fumes in the air. I've also tried some lichen type things, and I haven't done a lot of that yet, but there are Facebook groups for mushroom dyeing and lichen dyeing, and they get all sorts of beautiful colors. So that's another avenue to go down too. There's just a lot of ways to use the things around you to make color. It's pretty amazing. Any other questions?
well, you've done a fantastic job, Annie. It
Thank
was
you.
very, very interesting and educational. I mean, it was, so
Thank
it's
you.
very, very cool. And I look forward to seeing some more of your work and stuff like that. Cause, like I said, I have a deeper appreciation now. So I appreciate
Good.
it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just
All
curious.
right,
also
and
for
everybody,
people
this,
who-
this,
I was just gonna say, people who are, possibly thinking about doing some things, periodically, if you do kind of play with it, post it on members only page so we can kind of see, maybe how that what you use through it and how you're using what Annie's bringing to us, because it's been amazing.
Thank you. Yeah,
Mm.
Oh,
absolutely.
it might be remiss. Christine asked a question earlier and she had to leave. She wanted to know if the process could be used with cotton cloth or any cloth in general.
Yeah, with the cotton, there's that extra step in mordanting using the oat gall. But it really is just that extra step, and you should be able to dye cotton yarn, cotton fabric. The only thing that I would stay away from are the synthetics, because they just really, they don't take the dye at all. And that's true if you're using like commercial acid dyes too. You want to use natural fibers.
Marcy says thank you too up in Kansas City. I know she does a lot of dyeing and stuff herself.
Mhm.
She's has impressive work. So
She does.
yeah, you did. Yeah. Wonderful workshop, Annie.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad everybody was here and appreciate your time and have a fantastic day. And I might plant marigolds this year.
That's
It'll be for the
right.
cows to eat.
Exactly. Somebody's going to
Way
use
to
them,
put
even if it's not you.
Marigolds, yeah. Well, marigolds are an excellent plant to plant next to tomatoes because tomato bugs don't like marigolds. So they're an excellent companion plant.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I've also heard the deer don't like them, but deer seem to like them in our yard. So,
Well, everybody have a fantastic day. This will be recorded and up on the Best Missouri Hands YouTube show channel if you want to rewatch any of it and stuff. So it'll be up in the next day or two.
Great.
So have a good day. And next
Awesome.
month
Thanks
we'll
so
have
much.
one.
Thank you.
Yeah, next